Good morning and welcome to Politics Nation. This morning I asked three urgent questions. One, how little diversity is there really in the Trump White House? And how much should the lack of it surprise us? Two, can I challenge my comrades on the left to do the grown-up thing and show up and vote in 2018? You bet I can. And three, how disturbed should we all be that the new tax bill could hurt students' learning ability for generations to come? I'll give you the answers during the show, but we start with Alabama, as Democrats and Republicans are extracting what they will from the results of the Senate race there, with Republicans questioning just how far the party's moral compass sank in following President Trump's lead to support the defeated Roy Moore. And Democrats riding high on Doug Jones' narrow victory, their party licking its chops over what they see as a promising omen for the 2018 midterm elections. But the victory comes with an assessment, and much has already been made of just how instrumental black voters were in Alabama. My question is, will the Democratic Party learn its lessons and finally start embracing the black electorate that has come to its rescue for the past half-century? Joining me now is Eugene Scott, political reporter for The Washington Post, who was in Alabama to cover this race, and Randall Woodfin, who recently made history of his own, becoming the city's youngest mayor since 1893. Let me go to you first, Eugene. You covered Alabama.
Yes, sir.
And you were there, you talked to the voters. First of all, black women came out strong, and black men was only 3 points behind, really came out strong. What did you find were the things that you heard from black voters? What was the thing that led to this enormous black turnout that even exceeded the black turnout for President Obama in Alabama?
Yeah, most black voters I spoke with at schools, at churches, and barbershops, and restaurants I ran into saw Roy Moore as a local version of Donald Trump. They voted against Donald Trump after Donald Trump's statements about Charlottesville, after Donald Trump's statements about NFL players. They just felt like sending someone to the White House who was endorsed by, to Washington, who was endorsed by the person in the White House would reinforce many of the things that Alabama voters had worked for years to get away from.
So many of the voters were voting as a repudiation of Donald Trump.
That's what they told me, absolutely.
How much did the fact that Roy Moore had embraced that slavery was the last time America was great, and other things that was racially insensitive to offensive, how much did that play into it?
That was huge. One thing I don't think most people know about black voters is that they found Roy Moore problematic way before the sexual allegations came out. They weren't voting against him because of that. They voted against him because of things he'd said about black people, LGBT people, Muslim people, undocumented people. They found out that he was not the right person for Alabama way before what the Washington Post reported.
Now, Alabama has some very repressive laws now with voter ID. They closed some of the places you can get state ID, yet people found a way in the black community to come out and vote in big numbers anyway. Did you hear any complaining about these measures that had tried to restrict them, but yet they overcame them?
Absolutely. There were people who made it very clear that voting for them was not easy. There were some polls that were not operating correctly. There were people who went to the poll that they are used to voting at, only to find out that that actually was not the same poll they were supposed to vote for in this election, and they had not been notified. There were abnormally long waits that were, the thought was that people were not staffed, polls were not staffed appropriately, and that just across the board, people just did not have the information they needed to make the decision they wanted to.
Democrat DNC has been attacked by a lot of people, including me. They don't engage the community a lot. They go to wrong places. They don't really deal with the people on the ground, the grassroots, the churches, black radio, and they really don't understand our community. Did they correct that here? Because I got reports they sent in people, and the people there on the ground didn't even know who they were. I mean, I love Senator Cory Booker. I love others that went in, but they really didn't even know them or hear them. Did they have any impact on the voters you talked to?
Not to many of the voters I spoke with. So I heard two different things. I definitely spoke with people at the DNC who did send people and could point to everything they did to pull out the black vote. But many of the black voters I spoke with never ran into these people. They didn't feel like they actually came to their community. So they were there where was the question.
Some of the people they send are unknown, and the people that are known, they don't send. I mean, I don't understand.
Alabama voters are not really swerved whatever by celebrity politicians.
Right.
So they really could have done a better job, they said, of sending people in their communities who they actually recognized, opposed to people from out of state who don't have a huge impact on what people in Alabama do.
Now, let me go to the mayor. You know, Mayor Woodfin, James Brown used to sing, "I need to be the mayor so I could change some things around here." And while you were running, all of your Morehouse buddies was beating up on me, saying he's the new deal and he's going to be great, and a lot of promise in you. What did you observe in this special election? First of all, were you surprised to see the Democrat win and the black electorate be so important?
Rev, it's good to be on your show this morning. I think two things. I think the first thing is, I think the Doug Jones campaign didn't treat black voters or entertain black voters only during the GOTV Get Out the Vote effort. I think they spent an amount of time that was important around persuasion, that just because it's a special election, just because you're a Democrat, you can't necessarily take advantage of or believe they'll just come out. So there was a lot of persuasion going on black radio and black print, etc. I believe the other thing was the GOTV effort, whether it was text messaging, knocking on doors several times, etc. The Doug Jones campaign spent a lot of time with their GOTV effort, not just in urban Alabama, which would be Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, and Mobile, but in the Black Belt, which is part of rural Alabama as well. They spent a lot of time with their GOTV effort. I think the combination of those two things allowed Doug Jones to have a great victory.
Now, I have folk from Alabama. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, but my mother's from Dothan, Alabama, is buried there, so I know relatives there that told me that they had a real GOTV effort. Is that the formula that you think the DNC ought to be dealing with nationally? You are now a rising star in the party nationally, whether you want to be or not, and you're the mayor of one of the biggest cities in the South. If the DNC officials are watching you right now, what lessons do you think they should take from what Doug Jones did in Alabama?
I think Tom, under his leadership, as well as the entire DNC, has to embrace three things. First thing they have to do is make sure the bench is secure. Attract, recruit candidates who are not only likable, but viable and have a good personal story attached to great policy. I think the other thing they have to do is really focus on persuasion, that entertaining the base of the party, which is African Americans, they have to be in the space of persuasion. What is the actual story that's motivating black voters to support a candidate? Then the third thing is GOTV. We can never forget or disrespect the ground game. Everything is rooted in turning out your vote, your support. That is going to include knocking on doors. And so we're not disregarding TV or radio or direct mail, but those things supplement an effective ground game that allows us to motivate and get people to the polls.
Now, how important was it to have ex-cons be able to vote, ex-felons? My brother, Reverend Kenny Glasgow, works hard in Alabama on that, as you know. Was that addition important? What was the significance of bringing in people that had been disenfranchised?
It's all about the margin, right? And so it's extremely important. I think as it relates to whether it's Generation Boom or X or Y, whether it's black or white, or even from where your mother's from in the Wiregrass area or North Alabama, making sure we have a program around ex-felons having the opportunity to vote will always drive up turnout, particularly in the special election as it relates to, you know, you're going to have a slim margin of victory, but it works. So it's extremely important.
I like that. He said Generation Z Eugene, Generation X, boom.
Yeah.
For baby boomer. I'm boom.
Are you booming?
Boom. I'm the boom. Thank you, Eugene Scott. Thank you, Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin. Now, an important programming note. Next week, we have a special show as we wind down 2017. It's called The Year in Social Justice. I and a special guest panel will re-examine stories like white supremacy in Charlottesville, pro athletes taking a knee against police brutality, and Jeff Sessions' Justice Department. That's next Sunday, Christmas Eve at 8 a.m. Eastern. And on New Year's Eve, it's the 7th annual Reveries, where we give awards for the year's best and worst political moves, as well as the politicians who made the biggest impact in our lives. That's on December 31st at 8 a.m. Eastern. When we come back, 4 young black girls lost their lives in the bombing of a Baptist church in Alabama in 1963, done by the Ku Klux Klan. We'll talk to the sister of one of those girls. We'll be right back. This is Politics Nation.
Damn sure believe that I have done my part to ensure that men who hurt little girls should go to jail and not the United States Senate.
Along with the many adult women that have accused Roy Moore of child sexual abuse, Senator-elect Doug Jones' victory this week was also seen as a vindication for 4 black preteen girls: Carol Robertson, Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, and Denise McNair. They lost their lives in the brutal bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham on September 15, 1963. Jones built a reputation with Alabama's black voters as the federal prosecutor that sent 2 of the Ku Klux Klansmen responsible for the bombing to prison for multiple life sentences. Among those voters was Lisa McNair, who was born 1 year after her sister Denise was killed in the bombing. Joining me now, and it's an honor, is Lisa McNair. Thank you, Lisa, for being with us this morning. Tell us what the election of Doug Jones to the U.S. Senate, a man who 20 years later made people that were responsible for your sister's death held accountable. What did it mean to you and your family?
Oh, well, thank you, first of all, for having me. It meant the world. I think it was definitely exciting for us and our family because we feel it's very well deserved, just based on Doug's history in the bombing case and other cases, but also for the state of Alabama to show the rest of the world that Alabama is coming around and has come around, and giving hope to our people here that we choose to have love and unity rather than hate.
You know, I remember I was around 8 or 9 in '63, but I remember when Martin Luther King made the speech, "I Have a Dream," and it had really energized everyone in my church community. I'm from the North. And then just a couple of weeks later, a month later or so, the church bombing in Birmingham, and people felt like, wow, after this dream, after this going to the peak, here we see a church bombed and 4 little girls in Sunday school killed. And I visited that church and spoke there many times. And you were born a year later and have had to grow up being the sister of one of those victims. But I don't know if people around the country understand it is baked into the very fabric of that city. People, even 50 years later, over 50 years later, everyone in that town lives with some part, some reaction, some growing up to what happened to your sister and those other 3.
Yes, that's very, very true. I often meet people who don't know me, and then either somebody's with me will introduce me as one of the sisters of the bombing victims, or I'll share with them who I am, and they will almost every time just go into tears and cry. They always want a hug from me, and it just moves them so. And often people, especially people who were around during that time, will share where they were that day and their experience and how it made their whole family feel. It is definitely a product of who Birmingham is, and I think it's also helped us to be consciously aware all the time of how we look at people and how we interact with everybody because of what happened.
And even Condoleezza Rice, someone that I don't agree with on a lot of political issues and policy issues. I remember I interviewed her for a special I did here on MSNBC, and she talked about how she remembered feeling the ground move because she was born and raised in Birmingham, and she was there when the bombing went off and knew some of those that were killed. And she came out against Roy Moore. What did Roy Moore mean to you and your family over 50 years later to see this man spewing the kind of hate that he was spewing in terms of really saying slavery was the last time America was great? How did it make you feel with the personal pain your family has felt as a result of the bombing of your sister and the other three in the 16th Street Baptist Church in '63?
I really just felt bad that he thought that way, and he had those words to say and then covered it up with Christianity. It reminded me very much of what a lot of the Christians, some of the Southern Baptist Christians back in that time in the 50s and 60s would sanction that bad behavior, the segregation behavior, and cover it up with Christianity. Because we all know that that isn't how God believes, and that isn't what God is all about. So it was just sad to hear him say that, but I was grateful that the people of Alabama realized that that is not what God wants. That is not how we should live our lives here in Alabama and in America, and they rejected him, and so that was a blessing.
We still have a lot of work to do, though, because 48% of the electorate voted for him. There's still a lot of people in Alabama that give that kind of feeling a pass, or they are willing to support it. You were with President Obama in 2013 when he honored your sister with a medal. We've gone from being bombed to having medals in the White House and winning close elections. It's a struggle, but it continues, and we can win. I thank you so much, and bless your family, Lisa McNair.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Up next, why an old message about voting in political elections is more important than ever in this era of the Trump presidency. I'll be right back. Global nightmare that has been the Trump presidency has set in like a bad stain that we've all gotten used to, but are still hoping will wash out with enough water and Mueller brand detergent. But as the first year of this horror comes to a close, I'm inclined not to look at the drastic difference in tone, tenor, and tactics, the gulf of governance between the current administration and the previous one. That'd be too easy, as hindsight and nostalgia usually are. No, I'd like to do the more uncomfortable work of challenging my comrades on the left, too many of whom contended last year that there wasn't much difference between presidential candidates Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, emphasizing relative hawkishness and affinity for the donor class between the two of them. Yes, Secretary Clinton made paid speeches to banks like Goldman Sachs, and albatross used to characterize her as a craven corporatist. Politics make strange bedfellows, we all know that. But in President Trump's case, he brought that bed with him into the Oval Office, stacking his cabinet with Goldman Sachs alumni while naming an oil executive as his Secretary of State. And let's not forget the refrain among some in the black community that the candidates were essentially the same on the topic of police brutality, hearkening back to then First Lady Clinton's comments about urban super predators, a comment I've taken her to task for and one for which she apologized. But while candidate Trump paid lip service to the tragic deaths of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, his Justice Department under Jefferson Beauregard Sessions has all but dismantled the Obama administration's reforms, while he himself has castigated black athletes and activists that dared to point this out. But perhaps the most important distinction between the candidates, their assessments of the climate change threat, was lost on a plurality of millennial voters. According to polling, with many seeing no difference between a woman who, while not known as an ardent climate hawk, called the phenomenon a defining challenge of our time, and Donald Trump, who has called it a Chinese hoax and headed his Environmental Protection Agency with a climate change denier whose watch has been marked by an exodus of experts and an influx of extraction industry hacks. As I said before, it's easy for self-described liberals to paint themselves clean because they didn't cast votes for Trump. But adulthood is about making tough decisions, endorsing less than perfect options, and working to improve the resulting outcomes. We've got a lot of work to do in 2018, folks. Please do the grown-up thing, and this time, show up. We'll be right back.
There were a lot of things that I observed during the last year that I was very unhappy with, that I was very uncomfortable with, things that I observed, that I heard, that I listened to. As the only African-American woman in this White House, as a senior staff and assistant to the president, I have seen things that have made me uncomfortable, that have upset me, that have affected me deeply and emotionally, that has affected my community and my people.
Whether she resigned, as she has claimed, or was indeed fired from her position as an assistant to the president, Omarosa Manigault Newman's departure from the White House has brought yet another round of scrutiny to an administration already short on minority talent and long on racial controversies, not least of which being President Trump's rightfully maligned response to the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia in August, an episode that, along with his endorsement of Roy Moore and insensitivity toward a black Gold Star widow, are reported to have played a key role in Newman's discomfort with this administration. But despite the loss of its only black woman in a senior position, the White House claimed this week that a diverse staff remains a valued objective, even as Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders could not give any numbers to support the claim, and her boss didn't even bother to try. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Ali Vitale, who wrote about the White House diversity problem this week for NBCnews.com. Ali, this White House is the first I can remember in my lifetime that has no real senior blacks that have access to the president. I'm talking about, and I have fought from the Reagan years through both Bushes, who I adamantly disagreed with, but we knew the senior black near them. There is no, it's like the Rocky Mountains. The higher up you go in this administration, the whiter it is.
Well, and that's something actually that was brought up to former White House advisor Steve Bannon a few weeks ago, earlier this month, when he was told at a gathering of conservative African Americans, you know, there's not a lot of black people at the top of this administration. And Steve Bannon called that inexcusable, saying that he hoped and he thought that there were being steps to change that. But of course, when Omarosa was taken out of the mix in this administration, it only became more apparent that there really is a diversity problem at the top of this White House. I mean, when we started digging into it, we found that, you know, when you look at the cabinet, Ben Carson is there. He is now the most senior African-American advisor in this White House for housing and urban development. And so it's certainly something that this White House, when they say that there's an effort to make it better going forward, there certainly needs to be that effort, because you're right, there is clearly a problem here with diversity from a race perspective at the top of this Trump administration.
Now, you know Omarosa. I disagreed with her, but I know Omarosa. She was a member of our Los Angeles branch of National Action Network. She spoke at our convention this year. We took her to task because we disagreed with her defending President Trump. Other guests there took her to task. But to say that they didn't know what her job was, she was in the public liaison office, which others have served in that position in every administration. Maybe they didn't know her job because they don't know what it is to reach out. Maybe because they're so alien to reaching out, other than the lobbyists and people that come to them with contracts, that they don't understand what she was doing. Part of the job was to go to groups, organizations, churches, and reach out to people. I disagreed with the politics. I disagreed with who she was working on behalf of. But to say she didn't know her job, I don't think they knew what her job was supposed to be.
I think that's probably a fair assessment. I mean, when you had initially Reince Priebus as chief of staff in this White House, the door to the Oval Office was definitely more open to people coming in and out. And Omarosa was one of the people that really took advantage of that. And she was in charge of outreach to minority communities. And like you mentioned, there was a lot of pushback from the African-American community when she did attend these events on behalf of the Trump administration. That's because the administration has not really done a very public or aggressive job at reaching out to minority communities. And so I think that when you're tasked with that in the Trump administration, and it's not a top priority, it is difficult then when you say, okay, what is she doing with her day-to-day? I guess I can understand why people say, well, we didn't really know what her job was. Of course, when you brought in Chief of Staff Kelly, he did restrict access to the Oval Office, and Omarosa was not getting as much face time with the president, as far as we understand it. And so then when she says, well, Trump found out about my resignation on TV, that makes a little bit more sense. And so you've seen a crackdown with this new era of the John Kelly Chief of Staff era, and that kind of makes a little bit more sense as to why Omarosa's access was restricted. And when you think who has the president's ear on these issues, you have to wonder who's next in line to kind of be the voice for, you know, African-American outreach, or in general minority outreach. Because when you don't have a lot of people who, who all look the same in this administration, you have to wonder, you know, are extra voices being heard? Are other diverse voices being heard? Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you, NBC's Ali Vitale. To continue the conversation, I want to bring in my colleague and dear friend, Joy Reid, the host of AM Joy. Joy, I'm not going to dig deeper in the Omarosa thing. I think that we all know we have disagreed with her. Sure. And I really think it's a lot more. They don't know what she was supposed to do because they've never done it. I've never seen a black in a high position at Trump Towers when he was running here. So I mean, what are we talking about here? They're going to say she didn't know what her job was. They don't know what her job or reach out is. And you got to have something to reach out with. But
exactly.
Let's go to the broader issue here. I mean, you are, aside from hosting AM Joy and all that has brought to this nation, have been an author and have really studied the difference in policies in terms of racial politics. How important is diversity at a White House level in terms of setting policy for the nation, for all Americans?
No, absolutely. It's crucial because of the diversity of the nation, right? And as you know, Rev, you know, the nation is only becoming more black and brown. And so if you have an administration that is staffed almost entirely by white men, who would comprise about 31% of the population of the United States, they can't possibly really understand in any depth the needs and interests of any of the other communities, whether it's the African-American community, the Latino community, et cetera, Asian Americans. There's so many different groups of people that typically, whether they're Republican or Democratic administrations, they've tried to have at least some window into those other communities so that they can make policy that's appropriate. But Donald Trump is not sort of in the traditional sense acting as the president of the United States. Donald Trump is still acting as sort of the carnival barker for a very small but very vehement fan base. Right. He's still acting like a television personality who's entertaining his fans. And the way he staffed his administration was accordingly. Omarosa has had a 14-year personal relationship with Donald Trump based on The Apprentice.
Right.
He reached out to her because he's comfortable with her. Right. She's African-American and a woman, but he's someone that he could communicate with. Lynn Patton, who's probably the only other African-American woman left in the administration, was the wedding planner to Eric Trump, his son. And now she's in charge of the funding for people who are in poverty in using HUD housing, which she has no qualifications for, but he's comfortable with her because she worked at the Trump organization. You know, Ben Carson is somebody, maybe he heard of him and he decided during the campaign, well, I need a black person, HUD, black person, I'll put him in there. This is a guy, Donald Trump, who thought about putting Steve Harvey, entertainer Steve Harvey, in some position dealing with poverty. He doesn't have any depth.
But now we don't see really anyone but maybe the event planner left. And the point is that, I mean, you documented it in one of your books as we've gone through racial flashpoints, which only expose the institutional problems.
Yeah.
When we deal with, in my case, a Trayvon Martin or a Ferguson or Eric Garner, they only represent a deeper problem. It's not that they're just isolated problems.
Yeah.
And there's no one in the White House that you can talk to that can understand that and communicate that. In every incident that I've dealt with over the last decades, even when Bush and it was in, we knew who we could talk to. Even if we were going to argue with them, we knew the Robert Browns, the Art Fletchers, all the way to even President Obama, who was black himself, but had Valerie Jarrett and Scott Monis and them there. There's nobody that black leaders can talk to that they know. We did know Omarosa. We might have taken her to the witch hut a few times, and she might have fought back. She was no pushover. But we knew it. There's no one there, and they don't even seem to get it.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time that for a lot of African Americans, it was offensive to say that this reality show star is who we have to talk to.
Absolutely.
That the only person you're going to give us to talk to is Omarosa. At the same time, as you know, when we were at the NAACP Image Awards last year, Omarosa was there. When NABJ happened, Omarosa showed up. She at least was willing to go into these spaces and talk to the NAACP, talk to National Action Network. She was willing to have the conversation, even if she was controversial and knew she would be.
And
at
even
least
if we took her to task.
And even if she was taken to task, at least she would show up. This administration partly is suffering from the fact that they don't have access to what normal administrations do, which is the previous Republican administration's experts. Because remember, Omarosa is and was a Democrat. She remained a Democrat to you know, I think to this day. She was working in the Clinton administration. She supported Barack Obama in 2008. So when she came in, she was in a sense the gatekeeper for who else would come in that was of color.
They ignored the old black Republicans.
All the black Republicans were frozen out.
Who paid their dues. And the timing, they did it the week the president was overwhelmingly supporting Roy Moore.
The day that black women helped Roy Moore to be defeated.
The day that black women took Roy Moore down, who said that slavery was the last time it was great. You hire your most high, you fire. Or force the resignation of your most high-profile black in the White House compound?
And doing it, from what I understand, either at or just after the White House Christmas holiday party. I mean, literally the same night, the same Tuesday night that black women delivered that victory for Doug Jones in Alabama, that's the night that you fire your only high-profile African-American woman. But they don't understand. Optics don't matter to this administration. Policy doesn't matter to this administration. Obviously, John Kelly took the opportunity when she was physically separated from the only support that she had in that White House was Donald Trump. And without Donald Trump able to personally protect her, Kelly was able to get rid of her. He's wanted to do it for quite some time. And so the optics of it are bad, but I think you made the point, Rev, that's more important. There really isn't anyone for the African-American community and leadership to talk to in this White House, because Donald Trump certainly isn't the person that you need.
And that is sending a signal that they don't care.
That's correct.
What we think, which is why we got to keep mobilizing. I'm going to make a deal with you, A.M. Joy and Politics Nation. We're going to find a reporter to ask Sarah Huckabee Sanders if she knows what Kwanzaa is.
Wouldn't that be interesting? Maybe she can bake a pie for it or buy one or whatever.
Really? She probably would answer that way. Thank you, Joy Reid. Don't forget to watch her on her own A.M. Joy. That's right here on MSNBC beginning at 10 Eastern. Up next, a look at just how dangerous this Republican tax bill will be to children, possibly yours, on getting a public education.
It'll be the largest tax cut in the history of our country. It will be the greatest Christmas present that a lot of people have ever received.
President Trump's own words late last week on the impending passage of the sweeping tax bill. Concerns, however, are being raised on how it will impact your bottom line, as well as public services. One leader in the field of education says it takes direct aim that could hurt students' learning ability for generations to come. Joining me now is Randy Weingarten, the president of the Federation of the American Federation of Teachers.
Thanks,
Randy, you say this could actually impact students' learning ability for generations to come.
Absolutely.
What, I mean, you're the most prominent teacher leader in the country. What are you talking about?
So this is what, let me just say this is what happens with this bill. And frankly, the Republican congresspeople who represent Long Island and Staten Island completely agree with me and did a press conference with me a week or so ago about this. So in places in this country that have really invested in schools, in California, New York, New Jersey, and there's about 10 other states. A lot of them happen to be the states that actually also voted for Hillary Clinton, by the way. We spend a lot of local and state taxes on policing, firefighting, infrastructure, schools. That used to be, if this tax bill goes through, that used to be deductible on your federal tax, for your federal taxes. So you wouldn't pay double. You'd pay your federal taxes, and then you could deduct your state and local taxes.
So you pay your federal, you pay your state,
and then
you can deduct your state.
Exactly.
And these are states like New York, California, New Jersey.
And this has happened for 100 years.
Right.
What this bill does is it basically, and that costs the federal government about $1 trillion.
Right.
1.3 trillion. So what this tax bill has done is basically says, I'm giving corporations and individuals who are rich about $1 trillion tax benefit, and I'm taking it from all those folks in all those states who have spent money on local services like education. So what it means to an average American is that they're going to get a $6,000 tax increase if they had actually itemized their deductions.
So you get an increase of average of $6,000.
An increase in taxes, yeah.
In taxes,
yeah.
Increase in taxes. In those states, you're really paying twice.
Correct.
And you're paying it to subsidize getting $1 trillion cut to these private corporations and these super
exactly. Who, by the way,
in this tax bill that they're getting ready to pass.
Exactly. And that is why there are these independent groups that are saying that this tax bill will increase taxes for 87 million middle-class families and for 67 million middle-class families who make less than $100,000 each, or less than $100,000. And that is not even counting what's going to happen to increases in health insurance, because there's going to be an increase in health insurance for about 13 million people, and that doesn't include the automatic cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and other things that the triggers require because this tax bill has $1 trillion of deficit. So in sum, what this means is this is going to be a huge squeeze on on the ability of localities and states to invest in infrastructure, to invest in schools. That's where school funding is invested in. It will also be harmful to everyone who gets Medicare, Social Security, or Medicaid. Paul Ryan's already said it. And what does it do? It gives 60% of the benefits to the top 1% who already have 40% of the wealth in this country. And frankly, a lot of CEOs have said, even Bloomberg has said it this week, that this is a blunder. Robert Crandall, a former CEO for American Airlines, said, we're not going to create jobs here.
No, they're all saying it, but nobody says it like you, Randy. I wanted you on to clarify that for us this morning. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Up next, my final thoughts. Stay with us. Had come out this week saying these words should not be used in any memos, any requests, anything of official documentation at all. The term or word vulnerable, entitlement, diversity transgender fetus, evidence-based and science-based. Words matter. If you take the words out, if you eliminate references, you're eliminating policies that address them. So they're saying that CDC, don't talk about diversity. Don't talk about science-based evidence. This is the Center for Disease Control. So then, what are you talking about? Don't talk about the vulnerable. So you're not going to project trying to service the most vulnerable. You're not going to deal with people with transgender rights and transgender challenges. You're not going to deal with those that need your help and agency the most. You just took them off the table, out of the discussion. That's why we protest. That's why we march. Because you'd rather take us out of the discussion, and we can't afford for you to have the discussion and we not be a part of it and force the table to bring solutions to